We are here today with Professor Cris, Department of Anthropology, University of Auckland. Thank you, Cris, for joining us today.
We have asked you to join us today because of your expertise in the anthropology of higher education reform and the study of global knowledge economy.
So, Cris, what do you consider are the key trends in higher education in the world today?
Thanks, Catherine. I'd say that, first off, that I think one of the most important changes is the relationship between universities and the state. And perhaps this has led to a wholesale reconceptualization of the value of higher education. In the past, a university degree was considered to be a public good, something that the nation was happy to invest in because we needed skilled graduates, an educated workforce to boost our economic standing. Today, by contrast, that vision has completely gone. The new concept of higher education is that it's primarily a personal, private, individual investment in your own career. And that change has major significance. It's been brought about partly, or it's on the back of, the reduction in state funding for universities. Universities increasingly have to find new sources of revenue to fund their activities. That in turn has led them to becoming more entrepreneurial, more commercially orientated. And as you probably know, it's led to increasing burden on students. Students have to borrow money to fund their way through universities. Grants are few and far between. Student loans have increased almost exponentially to become arguably one of the greatest debt problems facing the next generation. And in that context, I think the whole new set of relationships have been established in and around the university. In short, the very culture of the university is changing quite dramatically. Certainly changed enormously since I was a student, maybe some 30 years ago.
And how do you think other different or maybe similar changes present in your own country or maybe region?
Well, I mean, New Zealand in many ways is an interesting experimental case study. In some ways, it reflects the trends that you see in other countries. Yes, we too have universities subject to the same pressure of funding, trying to negotiate their way with government, trying to make the most of a situation where every year net funding is reduced by some 4%. But also in many ways, New Zealand was a bit of a trailblazer, a pioneer. I mean, many of the reforms that we come to know as the neoliberalisation of higher education were trialled quite extensively in this country very early on. In fact, way back in 1984, under a Labour government, where we first started to initiate a whole series of market-led reforms and outsourcing and principal-agent relationships. New Zealand is also a pioneer country for another interesting set of processes that are very much associated with the reforms, and this is new public management. Many of the ideas were developed by our own New Zealand Treasury. I think they borrowed the ideas from the Chicago School. So in some ways we're a fast follower, and in other areas we're actually a bit of a world leader, for better or for worse.
Good, thank you, Cris. In our EC European Commission, Universities in the Knowledge Economy, that's UNIKE, in this funded project, we are interested really in the ways in which universities are being enrolled to produce knowledge and workers for the economy. Is this something that you see happening in the context in which you are working?
Yes, I do. I've been involved in a project with my colleagues Nick Lewis and John Morgan and Nigel Howarth, and we call it Mapping the Third Mission, and we're trying to look at the extent to which universities in New Zealand are engaging with or embracing the new opportunities and the new entrepreneurial initiatives, how they're sort of trying to interact with business and industry. And it's quite striking the extent to which all of the universities in New Zealand have developed commercialization units or technology transfer offices. There's a new language, a new vocabulary to describe the activities of the university, which are all about translational research, bringing ideas to market and having new sets of experts have come into the university to try to commercialize research. And in the past, that idea was very much minimized. It was not the forefront of what a university was supposed to do. I see it increasingly prevalent and present in this university. The bottom line, as they say, is the financial baseline, and the university is driven by all sorts of imperatives to try to find new revenue streams, new sources of income, and to really by commercializing ideas, and this is sometimes reflected in new patents, but more often in the development of licenses, new software products, and so on. So the university is changing in that way.
And how do you think, what is in your estimation the most positive outcome of recent changes in higher education?
It's interesting. I'm glad you asked that question, because very often academics, when asked about these processes of neoliberalism, of university reform, always highlight the negatives. The fact that it's led to the commercialization of the university, somehow as if it was an adulteration of the rather purist model, the Platonic, the Plato, Aristotle model of the university of being sort of set apart from society, a space where you're free to experiment with ideas, to be the critic and conscience of society. That's actually what a university should be as well. But it's not all negative. Academics and university staff do have some agency in this. And if you ask me to list, what are the positives that have come out of the last 30 years of this process, and it is probably 30 years that we've been seeing this steady shift towards a new conceptualization of the university and university degrees. I think one thing is it's really opened up the university to more international trends and currents. If you look at Auckland University, for example, I think some 60% of all the academic staff are from overseas or from elsewhere. So there's a massive internationalization of the academic labour market. Likewise, there's increasing flows of transnational flows of students. I think that's had a net positive effect. It's made the university much more multicultural, cosmopolitan and diverse. I think the other key trend is that the university traditionally in the Humboldtian model was actually quite fixed and static. There would be a pyramid. At the top was a kind of an old baron, the professor that had been there for years, and there was only one professorial post, and in order to get that you almost had to wait for somebody to die or retire. Now the model is different. We have many professors. The career paths have opened up. I think that's really important for women and for gender. The glass ceiling, there is still discrimination, and you see that women are not so well represented in senior management positions or in senior professorial posts, but there's much more opening than there was in the past. And the emphasis on research has led to much more mobility. And again, that's a third very positive thing, that academic careers are increasingly mobile. And that's partly because of the whole agenda around universities competing in the knowledge economy for positioning themselves in the global rankings, which have become very, very important, as well as revenue streams, your status, your position. And many, many universities, Auckland University included, really do pride themselves with being in the top 5% of the world's leading research universities.
Thank you very much. And you started to speak about entrepreneurship. And what does it mean in the context of public university?
It's an interesting question, because it's technically there's something of potentially a contradictory statement. I mean, in its very technical, strict sense, entrepreneurship, entrepreneurialism is about bringing products to market. But I think the way that we tend to use that word in academia is in a much more kind of sociological sense, sort of the sense of implied by Joseph Schumpeter, which is it's more about a disposition where you are more attuned to the idea of profiting from your activities. In a strictest sense, an entrepreneur is somebody who risks their own personal capital in pursuit of financial profits and returns. Well, I'm an academic, what capital am I risking if I go in for some sort of entrepreneurial activity? Even if I invented something, yes, I might, earn some money from it, but that isn't the motivation, and I'm not really risking my own personal capital. I don't have to mortgage my house. So the concept of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurialism is slightly different, but I think where it does have significance and where it really does have meaning is the extent to which the universities are talking a new language of enterprise and entrepreneurship. So we talk about, innovation. We talk about an investment approach to research, or everything is seen in terms of a return. The government funds university, but it expects a kind of return. We start counting the number of, we start to quantify and have performance indicators and targets, measures, and they are very often measured in, the bottom line is that they are measured in dollars gained, or even through alumni charitable activities. So in that sense, entrepreneurialism in the university is become a portmanteau word for describing the whole way in which universities are now speaking the new language of business. Even if somebody from business would say, no, you're only playing at this. This isn't really how it works in business at all. But we like to perform the university in a way that sort of, according to some people, emulates the business world. Although I'm sure if most of the universities really were businesses, subject to that, the market, then many of them would go belly up and have to be bailed out or rescued or closed down.
So are you saying that you do not really believe that the universities are truly entrepreneurial in the sense of the word?
I'll put it this way. I think if there is a vision for having purely entrepreneurial-based universities that are devoid of public investment and spending, you do have that model. In New Zealand, we have 8 universities. None of them are privately owned. I don't think there's anyone is seriously thinking that that is a possibility. I know that in the United Kingdom there are 1 or 2, but a tiny percentage. That is a very different path to go down, and I think most people in New Zealand would look slightly warily at that model. It wouldn't work in here. The universities, although they are very entrepreneurial, I think this University of Auckland probably gains some 50% of its income from external sources, i.e. not from direct government subsidy. But it would be a very hard call for any university in this country to go it alone and earn its own keep.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Cris Shaw, for taking the time out to speak to us today. Well appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.